Okay, so we're now on to IA3, your creative writing or your imaginative response. This will be potentially in term 3, perhaps term 2. Again, it depends on your school and the way that it structures your pieces of assessment for English. So, creative response to a written text is what this has been called. And so we need to think about how to turn a base text, or sometimes called a springboard text, into an original piece of writing. So, springboard meaning you're going to be going from the original and springing from that, using that as a launching pad, as a source of inspiration for an idea that you're then going to build on in your own original piece of writing. And like the public audience writing task, this can take many forms. You can be doing anything in this aside from a poem. So you can be doing anything that's familiar, so something like a short story, to a narrative intervention where you're filling in a silence or challenging a silence in a story. You could be doing a creative kind of essay, a series of diary entries, a script for a play or a podcast, for example, some kind of film script. There are lots of different options that you could be using for this piece of assessment. So it's about thinking about the base text and what best works for the way that you want to approach creating your own piece of content. So you and the author need to be really closely aligned with this piece of assessment. When it comes to this assessment, you want to provoke an emotional response in your audience. It's about positioning your audience to feel emotional about what you're covering. And the first step to being able to do this is developing that relationship with your base text. You need to be able to understand it. So read it not just once, but more than once if you can. And the original author must have done a good job of doing their piece of writing, because it would have been a well-recognized text in order to be selected as one of the texts for this task. So thinking about how you're going to link your task to that original piece of writing. How did they do it? What strategies did they use to make their piece effective? Was it the characters, the aesthetic features, the relationships? And you can choose these different aspects and think about how you can build on them, make them your own, and that sort of thing in your piece. So, some key concepts. Every text has a key concept, and that's going to influence the emotional response that the audience feels by the end. And it's your job to bring that concept from the original text over to your own text. And keep in mind that it's not just you regurgitating the original text in a shortened kind of format. This is you springing from that original text to create something that's uniquely yours. It could be a key theme that you use to bring over to your own text. It could be the main character's personality, the setting, the cultural background of the piece. All of these elements can play a really big role in how audiences react, and choose one that produces an effect, a really clear kind of effect. Be strategic when you're making this choice. So it should be something significant from the original text that you can think about that develops that meaning in your text. But as I mentioned, don't just bring everything across. Some of it needs to be fully your own original work. So In terms of choosing your concept that you're going to take from the original text, think about your interests and your passions and things that resonate with you from that original text. Because it is a lot harder to write about things that you aren't interested in, that you aren't familiar with, or don't feel inspired by in any way. So be creative with things that you are interested in. And in line with this, the way that you choose to approach adapting the original text also should appeal to you. So don't set your piece in a historical kind of period that you aren't interested in. Don't choose a genre of creative writing that you aren't comfortable with. All of your decisions around this should be strategic to make it as easy for you to do as possible. Mind maps. Mind maps can be a really good way of organizing your thoughts. And so you can see how you can go from that central idea in the middle and you can map out your different ideas from there. And this can be a really good way of getting all of your ideas on paper in that visual kind of way, and then you can go from there with that more organized version of your planning. Characters. While we might get caught up in abstract themes and concepts and pretty colors when thinking about analyzing and writing, at the end of the day, characters are the main part of a story. We want to like the characters, or we want to at least like the protagonist. We want to see some development in characters, so it's not just the same thing throughout the whole piece without any progression. So when we say static characters, that's a character that's just flat. Nothing is happening, and we don't have any interesting things to look forward to. So what makes a good character? Let's have a look. The best characters are going to be believable. So human beings aren't one thing. They aren't one-sided. They don't like just one thing or dislike one thing. So they've got lots of different emotions. Lots of different things have happened to them in their past. They've got lots of relationships with different people. So keep that in mind when creating your characters. And so they're going to have a few different dimensions. It's beyond just the surface. They may appear simple on the surface to begin with, but they're going to gain complexity and depth as you reveal more about them, as you show their history, their connections to things, their interests, and things like that. It's about the way they act and the way that they speak. That's going to get across their personality. And don't bog down in physical description. Don't just be really blatant with the way that you describe characters. So they've got brown hair and they are average height and they've got blue eyes and that kind of thing. Outlining those things in a really outright kind of way is not creative. And it also doesn't tell us a great deal about that person. We want to look beyond the cover, so don't judge a book by its cover is the saying. We want to know what their values are, what their history is, the action that they're doing, and things like that. So to build your own story characters or good characters, you need to answer 3 questions. What do they want? what are they willing to do to get what they want, and how do they plan on getting it. And if it's something that they really, really want and they're willing to commit a crime to do it or to get it, then that is going to reveal things about that character. That adds a new dimension to them and makes it interesting. So yeah, you can tell a lot about a person based on what they really want. So maybe they want world peace, they want something really huge like that. Perhaps all they want is a sandwich. So if we think about Hamlet as an example, what he wants more than anything is to get revenge for the death of his father and to restore order to the kingdom of Denmark. If you want world peace, you might be content to just post about it on your Instagram story, on social media. If you want a Vegemite sandwich, you might be willing to murder for it. So you can see the difference between those different examples. Depending on what you want and how much you want to get it and what you'll do to get it, can really set up your story and set it apart from other angles that you could be taking. In Hamlet's case, he was willing to kill people and himself as well to ensure justice is restored, and he also repeatedly reminds the audience of this too. So sometimes motives and willingness isn't enough, and ultimately actions are speaking the loudest. It's about what you actually decide to do. There are plenty of things that we would love to have, would love to do, but we wouldn't actually be willing to go through with what is required in order to get that. So the actions are therefore speaking the loudest. In terms of Hamlet, he's crippled by self-doubt, fear, and procrastination, and ultimately he does a horrible job of restoring order and finding revenge for his father. So while he had that motivation and that willingness, he didn't really go through with it. And so these are the three things that you should be thinking about when it comes to your characters. Narrative structures. There's a few different techniques that you could be adopting. You've got your linear or chronological structure. This is where events are occurring in the order that they happened. So the order that you tell the story is the order that the events would actually be in real life if they were to happen. On the other hand, you've got a non-linear structure, the opposite, or it could be called fractured as well. So time is more disjointed. You can be doing this through flashbacks and flash forwards. Flashbacks are taking us back in time and are giving us insight into things that have happened before that perhaps are influencing the present, the history of the character, and things like that. And flash forwards are setting up the expectations of the audience for what is to come. They can really add that sense of tension because you can be getting hints of what the reader can look forward to. Circular. So the story ends where it began. You can start off at a certain point and structure your narrative in such a way that you bring it back to that point at the end. And this could be through some kind of saying that you include at the start and you've then finished with it as well. It could be about a certain kind of place that the character is in, a certain action that the character is taking, and bringing it back at the end to round off on that same kind of point. Parallel. where you've got multiple storylines occurring at the same time, and then frame a story within a story. Now, oftentimes when you're doing this kind of assignment where you do have quite a limited word count, the linear or chronological structure is easiest because you're going to be able to pull it off in that word limit, and you're going to avoid the confusion that could arise as a result of going between time periods. And that's not to say that you shouldn't do those other strategies, but if you do decide to use, for example, non-linear, then make sure that you are making it really clear when you do have flashbacks and flash forwards. Make it so the audience can follow it easily, because the last thing that you want to do is make them feel like they have to do work to understand it. It should be clear to them from the outset. So, short story structure. This is our pyramid that a lot of us would have seen before. You start off with your exposition, then you've got your inciting incident, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. So let's go through each of these. Exposition is about giving that background information. But in saying that, you don't want to do what I mentioned earlier and be really abrupt and just outline everything without any subtlety. So creative pieces should always start with that idea of subtlety. So don't just describe places, people, or objects without any kind of interesting aspects in there. So oftentimes we're told to start in the middle of the action. And this is also called in media res, which is a Latin term that just means in the middle of things. You don't want to start with the character getting out of bed in the morning. You want to start with the point where something exciting is actually happening to get straight into the good bit. And that is a key part of hooking in the reader. So it's about getting the audience curious. So introduce key themes or ideas. And we've got an example here. The secret history. So the snow in the mountains was melting, and Bunny had been dead for several weeks before we came to understand the gravity of our situation. So immediately we have got an idea of the setting, the scene, but we've also got this intrigue as well. Bunny has been dead for weeks, so we want to know who Bunny was or what their connection to the main protagonist was, whether the characters are okay, what situation they're in. So creating that sense of intrigue from the beginning is key. And also in your exposition, you should be introducing main characters, giving that understanding of where it is set and the kind of story logic as well. But just doing that in a way that's subtle. So not there was a girl who had blue eyes and brown hair. It should be more subtle than that. Attention grabbing. So happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Mr. Jones of the Manor Farm had locked the hen houses for the night, but was too drunk to remember to shut the pop holes. We've got some ideas of grabbing attention and then also setting events in motion. The thing that drives a story forward is the action. So most of your story should actually just be full of things really happening. And that's going to move events along more quickly. It's going to keep the reader more engaged because they want to know what happens next. So orient the reader with the narrator or the main character. So we've got some examples again here. When he was nearly 13, my brother Jem got his arm badly broken at the elbow. Understanding a little bit about the character and their background is important because they are, as we mentioned earlier, the foundation of a creative piece. If you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born and what my lousy childhood was like and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me, all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. That is really showing us the personality of the character. We are seeing how they speak. We're seeing their sort of outlook on things, and they are a little bit flippant in this. They don't feel like going into it. We get the sense that there's someone who's quite young and casual and that kind of thing. So understanding the main character is important from the outset. They are the ones that we're following throughout the story, and we need to be able to relate to in some way.